name's Steve Madewell. You're at Ecophilia Speakeasy. This is what we decided we were going to try to do. And when I say we, I'm talking about the collective brain trust of Dan Best and Rich Benz and Harvey Webster, and I'm the scribe. I just take notes. But we wanted to try to do something to encourage a greater interaction with the college campus and the students here, and to try to facilitate the opportunity for younger people to interact with some of the folks who have experience in a number of disciplines that are represented with the people that participate in Ecophilia and have participated in Ecophilia over the past 40 years. So Harvey and Rich in particular were real big fans of this thing that was called the Science Cafe. And, you know, it kind of ran aground about the time COVID came around. And so maybe these speakeasies can grow to that same level of prominence and participation. Because I think at its peak, the Science Cafe would have, 60 people attending. Or more. And for a while they were meeting at the Great Lakes Brewing Company upstairs, and they were really cool. I was at a couple of them. But the folks at the Jolly Scholar, when they assumed management of the Jolly Pizza, they thought that this might be a suitable place for us to try these speakeasies. And so that's what we're doing here. And this is our second one. Our first one was with, well, actually, this is our third one. Our first one was with Rich, and it was at the Jolly Scholar, and that's when we decided this might be a better place. The second one was Connie Hausman, who's one of the resource managers for Cleveland Metro Parks, and she did a nice talk here 2 months ago. And then tonight, Pat Bitler, who's got an amazing bio. And if you want to get into any of that, it was great.
I don't want to embarrass myself.
Oh, I thought it was fantastic. I mean, anybody that references moonshine in their bio has got something going on. That was very intriguing. But Pat is also a remarkably knowledgeable individual about this geologic outlier here in northeastern Ohio known as Little Mountain. And Little Mountain is not only a place of geologic interest, it has incredible natural history in regards to plants and animals that are somewhat unusual. And it has an unbelievable cultural history. And so with that, I'm going to let Pat take things over and do our presentation for the evening. Dan and I are springing for pizzas. If you guys want to order a pizza, just let Amber know. She's behind the bar there. And but drinks, you lushes, are on your own. But we'll Dan and I will split the pizza. And thanks a lot. And Pat, take it away.
I want to start by thanking everyone for showing up for this talk. I didn't really know what to expect, never having given a talk at a pizza joint before, but it's delightful to see such a nice crowd. One of the techniques for explaining the geologic, the biological, the natural history, and the human history of a place is to answer a number of questions. And I'm going to do that. I've got 35 questions that I've been asked over my career about Little Mountain. And the first one goes all the way back when I was a freshly minted geology major out of Ohio State University. I crossed the country to a place I'd never been before, Los Angeles, to start graduate studies at UCLA, where I met a strange group of people, I have to pick my adjectives carefully, known as Southern Californians. And they thought I was equally weird, coming from Ohio. And they asked the very first question. This is decades ago. Click. All right.
Hey, Pat, can you slide back just a little bit?
Yes, so people can see. Is that okay? Good. Okay. Okay. Is Ohio an alternate pronunciation for Iowa? Are they in fact different places? To understand this question, you have to look into the Southern California mindset. Howard, next. Okay. This is a worldview for a Southern Californian. Of course, there are 5 important cities here on the West Coast. Proceeding inland, the next important place is Las Vegas. Proceeding further, there is nothing of interest of consequences until you get all the way to the East Coast and are dibbling your toes in the Atlantic Ocean, and there's some important cities over there. You say, well, this is a worldview. It's only the United States. Yes, there is one foreign city on here. It is the destination of choice for every underage drinker in Southern California. And that's let me tell you this. This is our Sin City, Las Vegas. Tijuana makes it look like a Bible school class by comparison. But we'll talk about that some other time. Next chart. Okay. That attitude makes me think of this 1840 map of the African continent. Vast expanse labeled as unknown country. And I had to go back that far because, of course, the great Dr. David Livingstone eventually opened this area up, a humanitarian and abolitionist, highly revered by both Africans and Europeans. Next chart. So let's make a comparison here. A vast expanse is labeled as unknown country with a vast expanse labeled as country not worth knowing. Next chart. Okay, this leads to question number 2. How does one learn geology in a state that doesn't have any? Now the reason, of course, and they knew this, there were PhD candidates in there. The reason Ohio looks like this is because of geology. It's one of only 4 states in the country where more than 50% of the area is prime agricultural land. And for that, we need to thank the Ice Age glaciations for spreading all that new soil out. Next. So look at it from their point of view. To a Southern Californian, this is geology, Yosemite. Next. Or Bryce Canyon, where I did some mapping as a student. Next. Hawaii has Haleakala on the island of Maui, late-stage volcanic cinder cones. Next. Alaska has Denali, 20,320 feet, the highest peak in North America. Beautiful glaciers coming down, lateral moraines. But not to be outdone, we in Ohio have next the intersection of 290th Street and Ridge Road. Okay. Yes. All right. Okay. This, of course, is glaciology. And I told the Southern California, it says glaciology. That's about clay, silt, sand, pebbles, cobbles, boulders. That's not geology. That's just dirt. And so, but this is important. Sometimes, and you're going to hear this more than once, the most mundane looking features in geology carry the most profound messages in terms of Earth history. And this is one of them. If you were to make a right turn here, you could follow this ridge, which is paved, but it's broken up in a lot of places, all the way to Indiana and up around Michigan. If you turn left, you could follow it all the way across Ohio, Pennsylvania, and New York. This thing, okay, vertically it's challenged, but laterally it is the size of the Grand Canyon. And by the way, Chinese rovers just recently discovered an analogous feature on Mars. So this has significance. Next chart. A lot of these things are paved. Oops, back one, Howard. And this is Paynesville, Jackson Street, Mentor Avenue, Old Johnny Cake. Anytime you see Ridge Road on a street around here, you are traveling on one of those sandy ledges. Next. And here's the last one that's left. It's untouched, courtesy of the Cleveland Museum of Natural History. North Kingsville, has anyone been there? Some of you have. I'm impressed. I never have, and I feel sorry. I feel bad about that. It's one of the last remaining, or the last remaining fossil beach in Ohio. Famous for some of the plants like lupine growing in these sandy gravel soils we don't see anywhere. The importance of these ridges to the animals, to the Native Americans, to the early settlers, it got you out of the mud and grime. It was a natural base. That's why so many of them got paved and turned into railroads. Half the work was done for you if you were building a road. And that's how people moved along the shore of Lake Erie. Next. Okay. Question 3. How did Ohio State, supposedly without geology, attract the attention of the greatest geologists of all time? Next. Okay, and that, of course, is Sir Charles Lyell, born into wealth, educated at Oxford, attorney at law, college professor. He hated both jobs, spent hardly any time in any of them. What he liked to do was travel the world and look at rock outcrops and write about them. And what he wrote was so popular, he got even richer. And his masterpiece was Principles of Geology, published in 12 revised editions, but I think there were many more than that, because when I was in 7th grade, I found a copy in my school library to let you know how advanced our schools were in Greasy Creek, Kentucky. Our library consists of a bookshelf and maybe 100 volumes, and I pulled this 1890 version out, read it, and I was hooked. I knew then I was going to become a geologist. But someone much more significant than me had the same experience, and I'm so sorry I missed Richard Bent's talk about Charles Darwin. As a 22-year-old, he got He got volume 1. For $3,500, you can buy this in the original. He got volume 1 just before he left on his voyage of the Beagle. Volume 2 was published, and he received while he was on the trip. There were other great geologists before this, but this was the first man who could write about geology in a way that anyone could understand. And this book was his claim to fame. Next. Now, if Ohio doesn't have any geology, why did he end up here? He was fascinated by the Great Lakes and wanted to come to America and see them in person. And he linked up with this guy. Any ever heard of Jared Kirtland? I know a bunch of you have, all right? He was a prominent physician, educated in Yale, famous for his theories about the cures and treatment of diseases. But how many doctors you know also have a warbler, a water snake, a snail, a fossil plant, a cherry tree, a museum society, a professional journal, and a building at Yale University named in their honor? This guy was a polymath. He was into everything. He was influential in the first Ohio geological surveys, but don't get fooled by that. When they said geological, they meant everything, including plants and animals and wildlife. They were looking at everything natural in the state. Next chart. He asked Dr. Kirtland, show me something cool about Ohio's geology. And so he said, okay, watch this and see if you can explain it to me. And he took him out to these, you see them here, those we know are beach ridges. And Sir Charles Lyell looked, he wasn't a sir then, he looked at him and he says, this is a beach. I can tell by the shingle, by the gravel, it was created by a large body of water. Well, so explain to me why some of these things are 500 feet above the current level of Lake Erie and miles away. And he was stumped. He was flummoxed. He could not. Because he was there in the 1840s before the formulation of continental glaciation. No one knew at that time that Ohio and many other places had once been covered by a mile of ice, creating these features. So next chart, Howard. So what we're really looking at on these beach ridges is the ancestral extent of Lake Erie. At its maximum, it reached all the way to Indiana. Next chart. Okay. What is the connection, if any, between Little Mountain and Lake Erie? Lake Erie in its current configuration is about 5,000 years old, and Little Mountain is about, the sediments up there, about 130,000. Okay, go back. It's all right. Okay, next, back, going the wrong way. All right. Okay, what the age of the rocks at Little Mountain? Heavy fingers. Okay, one more.
Let's go for it.
All right, one more. There, we're good. Okay, what is the connection, if any? 5,000-year-olds, 315 million year old, forget it. There is no geological connection, other than the fact they both were affected by the glaciers. Next chart. If you remember nothing else about this talk, remember this map. This is mind-blowing. This isn't the only place this is an isopac map of average annual snowfall accumulation. It varies from less than 20 inches in southern Ohio to well over 100, maybe 120, 130, some years 150 inches on top of Little Mountain. That explains everything that's happening up there. This happens in other places in the world. The Andes, the Rockies, the Alps, the Caucasus, the Himalayas. How could it be happening in Ohio? I once did a comparison of the lowest and the highest point of every state in the Union and see which one was the flattest, which one had the most relief. It's not elevation, it's about relief. Ohio was fourth from the bottom. The only states with less relief than Ohio were Florida, Louisiana, and Delaware. So this is not supposed to happen, but it does. Next. So here's a view along Lake Erie, along the southern shoreline, artist rendering. It's so ridiculous I didn't bother to give it a number. But what this really is supposed to show is the Bermuda Triangle. I have been fishing in the Bermuda Triangle. I never saw anything that looked like this. But let's continue. Here's this strange place. Over a 400-year period, 200 vessels and aircraft have disappeared in a 500 square mile area. So now we're going to do one of many comparisons that we've done, that we're going to be doing in this presentation. Next chart. Lake Erie, in half the time, has lost anywhere from 3.5 to 45 times as many boats and ships in 1/50th of the area. And they get all the credit. This is a prime case of stolen honor. The Discovery teams never show up here, the Discovery Science Channel teams never show up here to interview people about this. Next chart. So what makes Lake Erie so dangerous? Next. Here's some storm waves that were photographed. I see a lot of sediment, so obviously this is close to shore. And what I think is happening here is they're hitting sheet pilings or some sort of a bulwark on shore and then reflecting back, and so you got two sets of waves crashing into each other. Regardless, this is not the place you want to be in a rowboat. Next. What makes Lake Erie so dangerous is two things. The first is fetch. The lake is oriented in east-west direction, paralleling to the prevailing wind, maximizing the distance over which waves can build. The waves in Lake Erie think they're in Lake Superior because it just happens by coincidence to be oriented parallel to the prevailing winds. The second is the shallowest. As you all know, it's the shallowest of all the lakes and about average of 30 feet. It causes waves to drag on the bottom and then distort, which is very bad for boats. Next chart. So what are the 6 reasons that lead to the conclusion that all signs point to north at Little Mountain? Next. Reason 1, Little Mountain in winter. Snowpack in the deep joints persists until June. If you go there in winter, you need a guide because you don't want to step into something like this. That joint drops down 25 feet. It bridges over with snow, and we've occasionally found dead deer at the bottom of it. You stay behind your guide for this. They're trained. Next. Dark-eyed juncos. This is their breeding range in yellow. At Little Mountain, they breed all year round because they think they're in Canada. Next. 3-lead golden thread. One of the botanists showed me this. I said, yeah, I know what that is. That's ground ivy. My lawn is full of it. Well, come on, Pat. She swept away the leaf litter and showed me these golden little rhizomes here. And she said, you know where this plant grows? Greenland. And the Latin name formerly was Coptis greenlandicum, and it's growing in a few places at Little Mountain. Next chart. Historically, everyone residing on Little Mountain was fixated on getting a view of Lake Erie to the north. This is one of the hotels, long gone. Next. And here's a pre-1982 map of all the infrastructure that used to be up there, every stick of which is vanished. There is nothing left. Okay, next, and they're all fixated. The 5th reason is this weird something called spotosol that developed in the northern latitudes, conifer forest, sandstone substrate. Spotosols are found in Seattle, the Upper Great Lakes states, New England, Canada, Alaska, Russia, Scandinavia. They don't belong here, and yet they're up there on the mountain. Next. And here's what they look like. This is what we all have in our yards, clay. Okay, if you buy a house here, I learned, here's a little core sample. This is silty, this is duff, decayed vegetation, silty loam, and clay. If you buy a house, your contractor is going to pull all that off, sell it to somebody else, and if you want a yard, you got to buy it back again. Spotted saw is on the right, and it looks like nothing you've ever seen in your yard because it is developed on top of the conglomerate outcrop there, very low in nutrients, high in aluminum. It's bad for plants. The reason some of these places have survived is that you couldn't farm on them. Next. The last reason is Little Mountain is capped with a white pine, northern hardwood, hemlock forest zone, and this is the kind of thing you would expect to see in upstate New York or Ontario. It doesn't belong here in Ohio, and this is the southwesternmost extension. So now question 7. Why did the early settlers make a mountain out of a molehill? Okay, let's take a look at how a modern person views a mountain. I took this picture in Pakistan around 1989, and we drove around a corner, and I was in a World War II Jeep, been repaired 100 times. I had a driver. You didn't see this coming. And we came around and this bend, I said, stop, I gotta take a picture. This is viewed by many people as the most beautiful mountain on earth. It's called Rakaposhi, it means shining wall. And this, of course, the KK is Karakoram Highway, part of the Silk Road of antiquity. So now we're gonna do one of these comparisons. Next. So this is a big mountain at 25,000 with a little mountain at 1,266 feet. So this is where you got to put your 19th century hat on, because it's hard to imagine a society where no one ever gets more than 25 miles from their house, because you had 2 ways of doing it, with a horse or on foot, unless you could afford a train ticket. So to the people who lived here, this was a mountain, and I'll explain why on the next slide, Howard. Okay, we're going to go back to that isopac map, but I'm going to talk about elevations. If you want to find the lowest point in any state, you pick the biggest river you can find and you follow it to where it leaves. And this is the Ohio River. The lowest point is 455 feet. The highest point in Ohio is 1549, Campbell Hill. That's a picture of it down there. A very popular tourist spot, as you can tell from the crowded parking lot. Has anyone ever been there? Oh my gosh, I am so impressed. You're the first person or human being I've ever met that made the trip. Okay. So, now let's look up here. Lake Erie, 571. Little Mount, 1266. Okay, almost 700 feet of elevation difference. That's 70% of all the relief in Ohio in those few miles between Lake Erie and the top of Little Mountain. So they had justification. Next. Okay. How could a mountain, even a little one, have formed in Lake County? Next. I drew this sketch. The dip you see here is highly exaggerated. It's really only 10 feet a mile. But if you're hiring someone to drill a well, those few miles can make a big difference in terms of the price. So what I want to show out is geology is like a detective story. These are Devonian age limestones. They are so cool because they're full of fossils. We hardly have any fossils around here. The outcrop in Ontario. You see the other formations that are here, all the way up to the Sharon conglomerate that caps Little Mountain. This is not really a mountain. This is an erosional remnant. But looking at those clasts, at those pebbles in Little Mountain, we can find a very few of them that are made out of limestone and that have the same fossils that outcrop here in Ontario. And that's the clue that the Sharon River that deposited this thing was coming from the north. Next chart. Here's what it looks like. Here's a sketch I made. What you have is this conglomerate and sandstone capping the mountain. It soaks up water like a sponge, and it's sitting on top of shale. Shale will not take water. So you end up with a lubricated contact in between. This thing starts to break up because the shale is weak. It starts to erode, and it undercuts the side of the conglomerate, and you get these big chunks falling off. Next. Here's a picture of what they look like. Looking at this, a college group I was talking to, it reminds me what a friend of mine, I know we have some great musicians in this group, Dan and Steve, my wife. I had a colleague who used to make money singing in bars and nightclubs in Frankfurt, Germany at night. And he says, it's called paying your dues. You're singing your heart out, playing piano. The restaurant's full of people talking and laughing and joking. Not one person is listening to what you're saying. So there's a picture of me paying my dues, trying to explain this joint to these students. Next chart. Okay, and when this thing breaks, it breaks all the way down. This goes down 25 feet parallel. And you can see some of the pebbles that make up the Sharon conglomerate. Next. This is one of those big blocks that's slowly creeping down the hill. Next. And it happens in a lot of places. This is from the roadside geology of Pennsylvania, a sketch. Actually, there's sediments above it. Where the same thing is happening, chunks falling off and creeping down the hill. Next. So here's the story of Little Mountain. 350 million years ago, that shale was deposited in water. By 318, this great supercontinent, Pangaea, had finished assembling. The latest stages of Appalachian mountain building was going on. We were starting to get a lot of erosion from the conglomerate. And that's when the Sharon conglomerate was deposited by rivers. Fast forward to 3.5 million years ago, you had an erosional surface. 1.7 million years ago, the glaciers advanced. We know of 4, there probably were around 50. They have a jealous way of wiping out all traces of the ones before them. But you can tell by the extent we had at least 4. And after the glaciers melted, we had the current outcrop. That's the story. A Southern California geologist looking at this, he would say, damn, Pat, 300 million years, and all that's happened in Ohio is a little bit of erosion, deposition, and some ice. How boring is that? Okay, next chart. This is something that amazes me. This is a chunk of Sharon conglomerate several miles from the outcrop, got dragged there by glaciers. And what's surprising is that if you look, and nothing could have survived that bumping and grinding, but the very same kinds of species of ferns and algae and moss have found this place and colonized it, even though it's several miles from its original location. Next chart. If this outcrop had been found out west, it would probably have been named Little Mesa, because that's basically what it is. Mesa is a Spanish word for table, the flat top hills and mountains, usually in arid regions. I've got some examples here. Mount Connor in Australia, 800 million year old Precambrian conglomerate. I picked that because it too is capped with conglomerate. Here we have basalt, sandstone, and out west, which would never happen here, we have a limestone cap because they don't get much rain. In a place where there's a lot of rain, limestone dissolves, but it acts as a cap rock in the far. And this is the rim of the Grand. This is the Kaibab limestone, the rim of the Grand Canyon. Next, this is a geologic map where the colors represent the different formations. The pink is Little Mountain, and that isolated piece over there belongs to this private land belonging to the Cryo family. Next. And it's not unique. All these places, Ansel Cave, Bennett McDonald's Ledges, Boston Ritchie, Gildersleeve, Pearson Creek, if you understand Little Mountain, you understand all of them. If you can lead a tour at Little Mountain, you're an expert in all of these areas. Just remarkably similar. Next. Can you name at least 2 ecophiliacs who have explored Little Mountain? Okay, next. Remember this guy? Dr. Joe Hannibal, celebrated geologist. He's still active. He's still teaching, I think, at the University of Akron. Here he is at Little Mountain. Next. And here's Dan Bess, former chief naturalist at Geauga Metro Parks, now natural area guide. He's wading through one of these underground caverns, which we didn't know were there, at Little Mountain, up to his chest in water, photo taking by his daughter. He's hardcore. I wouldn't do this. Okay, next. Question 10. Why does Devil's Kitchen stink? Okay, next chart. This is the outcrop where we take our visitors. And we walk them all through these different little joints and blocks explaining the geology. Devil's Kitchen is an enclosed area right here. And as you approach it, you get a strong smell of sulfur, rotten eggs. Okay? And here's how that happens. Next. Okay, and here's a picture of me explaining it. This is another college group. Next. Pyrite cement, it breaks down chemically into ferrous iron, which is in solution, sulfuric acid. The sulfuric acid dissociates into hydronium ions and sulfate ions, which are reduced by one of the world's oldest life forms, sulfate-reducing bacteria, which release hydrogen sulfide. A dangerous gas, it's explosive, flammable. Fortunately, nothing in there is enclosed enough for it to accumulate. And then that ferrous iron eventually reaches the surface at groundwater and it's immediately oxidized. Now you can glaze your eyes looking at this if you want, or you can use Dan Best's term, which I like much better. Bacterial flatulescence. And that explains the whole story. Next. Okay, and here's what happens when that groundwater comes out. That ferric iron precipitates these buff-colored areas as goethite and other minerals on the surface. Next. What has contributed to Little Mountain's reputation as a mysterious, if not fearsome, location? In the 1830s, there were strange sounds coming down from the mountain. It terrified the locals. They had armed posses traveling the mountain. It was howling and hooting, coming down from the mountain. No one knew what it was. They finally found out. It was a couple of boys had rigged up a barrel in one of those crevices with, I think, a sheep's skin on it, and they found a way to make it reverberate over the countryside and terrified everyone, okay? But let's continue. It didn't end here. This is a relief map of Little Mountain showing Stebbins Gulch, I-90, this East Branch of Grand River. A very important discovery was made in 1976. Next. The face on Little Mountain is almost exactly the same size as the face on Mars. Both features are roughly the same, proof of design by ancient extraterrestrial engineers. Now, there's only one problem. Next. Thanks to almost 50 years of improvements in digital orbital camera resolution since 1976, the face on Mars keeps getting less and less facier as we go along. So there's no correlation at all. Next. Okay. How is it possible to get hopelessly lost in only 191 acres of forest, that's Holden's Holding up there, completely surrounded by upscale suburbs? Dan, did you ever get lost in there?
Every time.
Okay. I gotten lost. I was talking to Howard. He's gotten lost leading tours. Here's what happens. You're crashing through briars and undergrowth. You're up to your shin in mud, and you're hoping the 30 people behind you don't recognize that you're off the trail. And suddenly you burst out onto a highway you've never seen in your life. Okay, this is humiliating because you're supposed to be the leader. Okay, so we're not sure why that happens, but I'm glad we've got professionals now leading the tours, and we won't have a problem anymore. Next. One of the reasons I think it's happened, this is Little Mountain's property, and that's the trail. And look at all those zigs and zags and turns. And for a long time, it wasn't well marked. And it was so easy, especially in this part down here, where so many groups had gone off in different directions, there wasn't a well-marked trail anymore. Next chart. What do we mean by the term conglomerate? The British call it pudding stone. And we think of pudding as one thing. To a Brit, pudding is what we would call a fruitcake. Think concrete, but not too enthusiastically. It's an artificial rock made of coarse aggregate, gravel, fine aggregate sand, Portland cement, and water. But don't get faked out. Now, I get brought stuff like this all the time. Next chart. This is a real piece of conglomerate from the Sharon conglomerate. The clasts are all different sizes. Now, this has been busted up a little bit on the outside, but they're all well-rounded by that river. that was flowing through. These are not conglomerate. This is the one on the left. The hint is that it's made out of all different materials that are angular. Obviously, got crushed in a rock crusher, and then used as aggregate for concrete. So that doesn't qualify. The next one over is close until you take a look at it and say, wait a minute, those are not quartzite, that's limestone. There is no limestone in our area. This stuff got hauled in from Western Ohio, Ontario, Fairport Harbor, and again crushed, and you see angular fragments into concrete, and that stuff in the middle is not quartz, but it is an aluminum silicate that's holding it together, Portland cement. And a lot of people are faked out by this, because when we see roads being laid, all we see is the asphalt. We don't see the aggregate. But the road surfaces we're driving on are mostly aggregate. Next chart. A lot of people will tell you conglomerates are boring. It's hard to find fossils in them. They tend to be massive. There's not a lot of structures. Just not a whole lot of fun for a geologist. I will say again, some of the most mundane things in geology carry the most powerful message. Next chart. So where are these? This is somewhere on Earth, and this was photographed by NASA's Curiosity rover at Gale Crater on Mars. These things imply a lot of fast water moving. And so the question is, where did all that water go? And that's the big mystery about Mars right now. Next. What are all those strange sedimentary structures that only a geologist could love? And I'm going to show you a bunch of them here. Massive conglomerate, cross-stratified, horizontal conglomerate, horizontal pebbly, massive conglomerate, trough-stratified, and there are more. I took all these pictures on a little mountain. Next. Here's my favorite, the graded and cross-stratified sandstone and conglomerate. And I'm so sorry that Dr. Fakari, we ran out of time, I wanted to show him this to explain this cyclic process here, but it was towards the end of the day, we had to get back. Next. And here's something the geologists call a horse belly, and he did a wonderful job of explaining this. There are horizontal beds down here and on top, but in the middle, there's no grading. There's just one big chunk of rock. It could have taken thousands of years for each of these strata to develop. This happened in one day. So this is one of the great controversies in geology from the very beginning. Do things happen quickly or do they happen slowly? And of course, we now know the answer is all of the above. Next. Okay. How do we know that the Sharon River was a braided sediment-choked stream? Next. Okay. I've got two rivers here, one in far north, it's a braided river, and then the Cuyahoga River, which is a mature river. The sedimentary structures I just showed you all fall in these two categories. None of them look like what you would find if you took a backhoe and dug a trench in the unconsolidated sediments along the Cuyahoga. Another important point, if you want to know what happened in the ancient past, check what's happening today. It's a principle of uniformitarianism proposed by, of course, Sir Charles Lyell. Next. And this is the Sharon Valley system. It was quite extensive, ran all the way down here, Kentucky and West Virginia. Next. Is there a modern analogy? And I would pick probably the Platte River out in Nebraska. Very similar, although this is a different kind of climate. The ancient pioneers that crossed it said 1 mile wide, 1 inch deep, too thin to plow and too thick to drink. They were not impressed by that river. But this is the kind of thing. A river barely able to carry its sediment load. Next. I couldn't resist this picture of another picture of the Platte River with the migrating cranes. Next. But you would not have seen that on the ancestral Sharon. It would have looked totally different. 350 million years ago, Ohio was near the equator because of plate tectonics, and you'd see totally different plants and animals. You wouldn't have recognized anything. Next. What is Little Mountain's weirdest sedimentary structure of all? Next. And that's this thing here. And in 20 years, I've never heard any geologist explain what this was all about. until Dr. Fakari visited. Next. What is the evidence at Little Mountain for a massive earthquake in the Sharon conglomerate? Next. Oops, back one. There's Dr. Fakari, ODNR, head of their geological survey, and he's explaining it to a group of about 20 people. A fascinating and wonderful explanation. Next. This thing was caused by an earthquake. And what's so puzzling about it, these are all the same kind of rock, deposited by the same river, in the same kind of depositional environment, but this thing in the middle is totally distorted. How could that happen? These are not distorted. How could you distort these without folding everything else? And the answer is it happened while it was still unconsolidated in a semi-liquid state. And it was caused by a massive earthquake of at least a level 7. Next. And here's the anatomy of an earthquake. It was caused, we know now, looking at modern sediments, it was caused by P waves. Those are the first ones to arrive. We can't feel them. But dogs or cats, wild animals, birds, they disappear long before we're aware that anything's coming. The ones we're aware of are on the far end, are the surface waves. And that caused the shaking that causes buildings to collapse and kill so many people. Next. How did the largest sandstone sinkhole in Ohio end up at Little Mountain? So another one of these weird comparisons. Next. This is a big sandstone, a big sinkhole in Florida. I'm guessing it's, I can't tell by these houses, half an acre to an acre in size. Ours is exactly 6 feet by 20 feet, but it's still the largest in the state at 1,200 square feet, okay? This is looking down from the top, but it looks more impressive. You look at the far right with someone standing in it. It's about 25 feet deep. Next chart. So these two professors from the University of Akron mapped all this. They found 7 sinkholes at Little Mountain that we didn't know existed. And then the Ohio Cave Society, these guys are amazing. They had no qualms about crawling on their bellies in a 1-foot-high crevice through mud and water and bat poop just to say we entered the cave. And they measure everything. And they found that that many of these places are all the black areas are covered. We thought this thing at the pump house went in about 5 feet. It just goes for hundreds of feet. Next chart. Okay. This is how it happens. You start out with unbroken conglomerate. The glacial ice caused some fractures. When it melted, it's called isostatic isostatic equilibrium. You've ever pressed your hand down quickly on a mattress, it slowly starts to come back up. Rocks and sediments do the same thing. So in the process of doing that, the joint got bigger. And then gradually something called arenation occurred. Another fancy word just simply means the sandstone cement was dissolved by groundwater, and the sand starts falling off the sides. It hollows out, gets bigger and bigger, and finally you have a roof collapse. That's how a sandstone sinkhole occurs. Very different than the way limestone sinkholes occur down in Florida. If you were all California geologists, you would have all fallen asleep by now. But this is exciting stuff. This is Ohio geology. Next. What sedimentary structure is defied explanation by several visiting geologists with PhDs? Next. And this is it. This strange conical hole, and you really can't tell how big. There's a fern here, but it's not a good measure of scale. So on the right, we have action photos of expedition leader and ecophiliac Dan Best offering his head as scale in the cause of science. So now, I don't know what was in there, but Dan definitely got a good close look at it. Next. Are there really living fossils at Little Mountain? And this is something that makes your butt itch, quite honestly. Because by definition, a fossil is something that's dead, the remains of dead life. But there are some great examples of animals, of plants that used to, that we can find fossils of. Next, okay. Ground pine, do you know where this is? You probably know, Dan. I'll show you sometime if we're back up there. and also shining club moss.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you've seen those. In the geologic record, these plants grew to 100, 120 feet high, their ancestors. Now they're small. Next. And they're threatened. These are a sign of a good quality, undisturbed soil. They've been over-harvested for Christmas decorations in the past. And the spores were used in those old cameras with the huge flash. The spores from these were used to ignite the flash. Next chart. And here's some club moss, photo by Tony Barabani. Next. Where is all that water going? Next. This is a tree growing where it shouldn't be. This is a yellow birch. Normally they grow streamside on riparian habitats. It's clinging to this rock. It's not even in soil at the highest point in Lake County. But there's so much water in the Sharon that it's able to feed this tree. Next. If we continue down the outcrop, you see where that impermeable shale reaches the conglomerate and the water starts to pool. Next. And then it starts to trickle down the hill, eventually ended up the East Branch Chagrin River. Next. And this is the major watersheds of North America. Most of the country empties into a continent empties into the Atlantic, a lot in the Pacific, the Arctic. This area here, Death Valley, drains inward and the water evaporates, okay, like the Dead Sea. 65% of the United States drains right down here out the Gulf of Mexico, of the land area. This is a huge watershed, Mississippi, Missouri watershed. Next. Oops. Back up. Okay. We are not part of that. We belong to the 5% of the United States that drains out the St. Lawrence Seaway. I have to tell you this story. I'm not sure what's wrong with our education system. I was up on Stebbins Gulch looking down in the valley into Stebbins Run with a college professor and a group of students, and I said, I'll give you a hint. Stebbins Run empties into East Branch Chagrin River. Where does the East Branch Chagrin River go? These were juniors in college. They had no idea. Okay, the East Branch connects with the Chagrin River. Where does the Chagrin River go? One student knew it connected with Lake Erie. Okay, where does Lake Erie drain? Well, Lake Erie is a lake. Lakes don't drain. They just sit there, okay? And meanwhile, the professor's ears were turning red. But it wasn't a class in geography. They were doing invertebrate biology. So I said, have you ever heard of the Niagara River, Niagara Falls? How many have seen Lake Ontario? No one. And these kids were all from Northeast Ohio, which of course drains, and they never heard of the St. Lawrence Seaway. So the reason why that's important, this is the most important watershed on the entire planet. There's more water here than there is in the Amazon, than in the Nile, and basically because of the Great Lakes. This is the world's #1 source of fresh water, and no one knows enough about it to take care of it, and that's kind of sad. Next, going the wrong way. There, other direction. There you go. What's the biggest threat to biodiversity? Next. It's those suburbs that ring the property. Next. And this is something called the edge effect, ecotone. In the short term, when you build these suburbs, you have greater species diversity. People bring their daffodils, whatever was on sale at the nursery, their puppies and kitties, and suddenly you have more kinds of plants and animals that you did when it was all forest. But ultimately, what you get is a drying out of the property. Higher temperatures, lower soil moisture, lots of people fertilize and kill weeds in their yard. That gets into your property. And it's eventually you end up losing endemic species. Next chart. Okay. This is Holden's property, which reminds me very much of the typical voting district in Ohio, highly gerrymandered. Okay. All right. This what's that?
It's not good enough for Ohio.
Oh, yeah, okay. You need to reach out 20 miles to grab those 3 Republicans, yeah. This edge effect will run either 100 yards or 100 meters or 200 meters in the forest. This is the worst case. We're assuming 200 meters and no conservation easement, that all of this land eventually gets developed in the suburbs, and you'll be lucky to find any endemic species here. If it's 100 meter, the situation improves markedly. You do get some areas that are going to have a good mix of endemic species. Next. This brown areas are conservation easements where the owners have promised not to clear their land. And that helps protect Holden's property from drying out. And at 200 meters, you still get some areas that are pristine. But at 100 meters on the far right is the best case. So this is our trail, this blue line that we follow. Do we find any native species on it? I see someone shaking their head. They're correct. Next. I think that's the situation. This is what we find. You know this plant, vinca. Next. English ivy. Next. This is a horse race. I love pointing this out. There are 4 vines growing up this tree. 2 of them are, actually 3 of them are native. 1 of them isn't. You've got poison ivy, native, Virginia creeper, native, and on the other side you've got common greenbrier, which will go up 30 feet on a tree. But you also have English ivy that's spread from somebody's yard. In 20 years, all you're going to see on this tree is English ivy. Next. Okay. And of course, Little Mountain is a clinic for invasive species, non-native. Next. Okay. What species of animals are attracted out there to life on the edge? And how do they interact with interior birds? Next. This is the forest edge. We love these species. They're not a problem. They show up in our suburbs. They love edge habitats. Next. Here are 3 non-natives and 1 native species. This bird here, house finch, came from California and was released in the pet trade, and they've become naturalized. But these birds, the other 2 came from Europe. The bad one, of course, is the European starling. But if you have any doubt that birds are descended from dinosaurs, take a look at this mugshot of a common grackle. Next chart. And then the known rust robbers. And what can you say about this? Because all these species are native. But this edge effect allows more of them to exist and operate near a protected area. Next. Of course, deer feed on a lot of the native species. Brown-headed cowbirds are parrot-sized nests. Next. But here's the worst one, domestic cat. This one is holding a hatchling. I think it's an American robin. I could be wrong. This one's holding a cedar waxwing that it killed. The cat doesn't care what species it's got. Worldwide, we estimated 500 million and birds and 1 billion small animals are killed every year. Next chart. Why do we care about edge effects and invasive species on Little Mountain? Next. There are some amazing plants up there. When I saw this, I told the botanist, I said, I've never seen this, where are they? And he said, I'm not telling you. He said, you don't need to know, and the last thing I want you to do is to drag 30 people in there to look at it. And the most I could get out of them, it's somewhere on Little Mountain or on the conservation easements. So these are, what I'm going to do here is only talk about, and they're highlighted in aqua, the flower and their habitat requirements. Starflower prefers northern forest. Roundleaf orchids prefers moist shaded forest. Next. Bristly sarsaparilla, it wants sandy soils on the top of cliffs. This wonderful plant, pink lady slipper, it needs soil, pine forest, and will not survive transplanting, as so many people have found out. Next. This is American ginseng. Prefers full shade in mature hardwood forest. I'm from Appalachia. I dug this stuff. for spending money. We would do it in fall when the berries came out. We would plant the berries, hoping more would grow up. You pull it up by the roots, you cut off the roots, you put them in a box by your fireplace, you let them dry out all winter, and in spring an old China man would come up the hollers, going from house to house, do you have any ginseng? And that's how we got our spending money. I tried to run some numbers on this. I have seen this on Little Mountain. It's the only one that I've seen personally. And I was a good doobie. I did not point it out to my group. Because currently the price for dry ginseng varies from $500 to $9,000 a pound, depending on how convincing it looks. It's got to look like a little man. And if a Chinese man buys this, he's not going to grind it up and drink it. He's going to put it in a bottle and show off to his neighbors that he probably spent $9,000 for this thing, or take a sip out of it every once in a while. It always amazed me that a country with 1.5 billion people would have a problem with male potency. And I asked a Chinese graduate student one time, a woman, she says, it's not that. He says, Chinese men want to be all they can be. Unfortunately, many, many species around the world are going extinct as a result of traditional Chinese medicine. Next. Sensitive fern needs acidic soil. Cinnamon fern needs wet soils. Next. Interrupted fern, preferred human forests. Lady fern, partial to rocky areas. Next. Hay-scented, wonderful stuff to smell in fall. It needs acid soils. Common polypody fern, the one you see growing on the edges of all the joints and ravines. It needs moist, shady, rocky woods. Next. How about the birds out there? I'm going to show you a bunch of birds. The list was given to me by Hans Petrushka. Hans volunteered. How many of you knew him? Okay. Hans volunteered at the Holden Arboretum, I think, for 50 years. He started when he was 12 years old. Birding. His efforts led to the Arboretum. He died 3 years ago, too young. Led to the Arboretum being declared by the an important bird area, IBA, by International Society for Bird Conservation. All that data he accumulated. So we're going to zip through this and talk about their habitat requirements. Next. Pileated woodpecker needs 100 acres of forest to breed. Next. Hermit thrush, ground nester, and eastern hemlock. Wild turkey prefers leaf-littered open forest. Next. Winter wren needs cool, shady hemlock forest. Scarlet tanager needs mature upland deciduous forest. These were all Hans Petrushka's favorite little mountain birds. Eastern phoebe needs deciduous forest, cliff faces, and here's a nest I took under one of the cliffs on Little Mountain, one of the joints. Eastern wood pewee, canopy nester, needs deciduous, black-throated green warbler breeds in eastern hemlock forest. Next. Wood thrush needs mature trees. Hooded warbler needs thick understory. Next. Acadian flycatcher needs mature woodlands. Blue-headed vireo, hemlock obligate species. It needs hemlocks. Next. American redstart needs a damp forest with dense understory of saplings. Next. I didn't bother to show the habitat requirements because the red-tailed hawk seemed to prefer the medium strips on the interstate. And the great horned owl can be found in downtown Cleveland, subsisting on skunks and domestic cats. Okay? But here's what I did here. I listed all of these requirements. Had you never seen Little Mountain, you could look at this list and draw a very good picture of what it looks like, just from the habitat requirements of the creatures that live there. This is a cycling enclosed system that goes on year after year, full of, it's just amazing. This is not just the next 181 acres that needs to be clear-cut for a housing development. I took a group of students up there. We were up there for 3 hours. They were business majors doing a science survey course. I explained all this, showed them all these wonders, and one of the students had a question. He said, you know, those people at the Arboretum are idiots. Why don't they join up with the landowners on the other side, make a consortium, Clear cut the top of the mountain, get rid of all that useless spot of soil, bring in fresh soil, whatever is on sale at the nursery, and build condominiums offering a view of Lake Erie over the whole thing. This is next chart. This is kind of what he had in mind, okay? I was floored, and I said, I hope this isn't the wave of the future, but it's about money, and I understand money is important, everyone does. In fact, question 27, could we justify clear-cutting the forest on a little mountain just to make a lot of money? And so some people would agree. Bo Derek, the actress, whoever said that money can't buy happiness simply didn't know where to go shopping. Claire Booth Lewis, money can't buy happiness, but it can make you awfully comfortable while you're being miserable. And lastly, money is the most important, not the most important thing in the world. Love is. Fortunately, I love money. And that's Jackie Mason. So that's important. But the hope is that this area will continue to be preserved. Next. This is the most important question of all, without question. Could you really buy beer on Little Mountain for 6 cents a glass? Next. This is Cleveland, turn of the 19th century. Miserable day, hot, polluted, the smell of sewage, industrial pollutants. How do you escape this? Well, you look at the advertisements next, and you go to Little Mountain, where you will experience cool nights, no humidity, hay fever, malaria, insomnia relief, no flies, mosquitoes, or gnats. I'm covered with mosquito bites from my last trip up there. So these guys were liars. Pure springs and healing water, balsamic scent of the conifers, a view of Lake Erie always, and then crevices and caves and absolute rest. And these are some of the hotels that were built up there. There isn't a trace left. I showed you this picture to show you how much effort they went through. This is a state-of-the-art facility for that time, built in 1893. Circular drive, tennis courts, gas heat, electricity, fire alarm, shooting gallery, casino, playhouse, hot and cold running water. Oh, thank you very much, just in time. This was a very modern hotel for that time. Next. Here's another one. And of course, its claim to fame was the cupola on top, offering, again, a view of Lake Erie. Next. I figured out the longevity of each of the hotels and plotted them on a graph. There were 7 of them, and they basically lasted from 1831 to 1942, but that's misleading. By 1920, these bottom 2 were in ruins, okay? They could never make much money up there because it's just, you can't stay open during the winter. There was no way to get up there in those days. Too much snow. Next. The rich and famous built cottages. They bought some land and put their own cottage on it. Next. This is something I'd love to see. I've never laid eyes on it. It's obviously not on Holden property. Next. And here's a guest enjoying the hotels. And notice how many tall silk hats there were there. These people had money. Next. Imagine modern people spending a week sitting on a porch on vacation. You know, it's just unheard of, but they were willing to do it. It cost, in addition to $600, one day was $2.50. A week at a hotel was $10 to $14, and most people couldn't afford that. Next. Here are people dressed up in front of one of the hotels, and you say, where's the cutoffs? Where's the I Climb Little Mountain t-shirt? People dressed according to their station in life in those days. You did not wear rough clothes because that implied that you were uneducated or a poor person. I don't know what's going on here, but obviously it involves some whiskey. Next. And here are people having a picnic, and given the photography of those days, you wonder how long they had to hold that pose with their mouth open and food in it before the camera went off. Next. And this is the church that was up there next. Which has moved 3 times from Lake Erie to the top of the mountain, back down to Baldwin Road. Next. Who were the rich and famous Clevelanders? John D. Rockefeller, James A. Garfield, Jephthah Homer Wade, Amasa Stone, E.B. Hale, Senator Henry Payne, and George Hoyt, the editor of the Cleveland Plain Dealer. This is Jephthah Homer Wade. We owe a lot to him, wealthy industrialist, one of the founders of Western Union Telegraph. He was the Bill Gates of his day. Philanthropist, built and decorated Wade Park and Wade Oval, and he was the founder of Hathaway Brown School and the founder of Case University. Next. Henry Payne, a senator, a congressman, ran for president twice, lost both times. Next. Now these are the people you could see walking around on top of the mountain. John D. Rockefeller, the most famous of all, industrialist, investor, philanthropist, world's first oil tycoon, world's first billionaire, in current dollars, the richest person who has ever lived. He funded the eradication of hookworm, of yellow fever. He founded the University of Chicago, a notable academic institution, and Johns Hopkins. Next. James A. Garfield, the U.S. Congressman, Senator, 20th President, Civil War hero, Chickamauga, Shiloh, assassinated only 20 days in office. I am convinced that Ohio's produced a lot of mediocre presidents, but this would have been an exception. He would have been a fine man. I'm a retired civil servant. He created the civil service based on merit, on competition, not based on political loyalty or paying bribes. And he was killed by a disgruntled person he wouldn't give a job to. Okay. He was an avid mathematician. He discovered a new trapezoidal proof for the Pythagorean theorem. He was the poorest of all presidents, even poorer than Abraham Lincoln when he started out, and he still achieved success. Which famous vacationer at Little Mountain was blamed for the Ashtabula horror? Okay, next. Amasa Stone. He was an industrialist, a railroad baron, philanthropist, benefactor and founder of Western Reserve, co-designer of a railroad bridge that was going to really speed up how fast the railroads would spread across the U.S. Next.
Is that the bridge that collapsed?
Yes, you're on it. You've heard of it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, he and his partner designed a very fast bridge made out of wrought iron trusses with pins that could be quickly pounded in to hold them steady. Well, the pins were poorly made. There were gaps, and to fill the gaps, they took wooden shims and sledgehammered them in there. Okay? The very first train that crossed it collapsed, the bridge. To their credit, the engine made it on the far side. Nothing else did. It was the middle of the night, not far from Ashtabula. It crashed into a deep ravine. In those days, the rail cars were heated with pot-bellied stoves. Everything caught fire. You couldn't get down there. There was 4 feet of snow. The rescuers couldn't get there till the next day, but the looters beat them to it. And they stripped anything of value from the carcasses. This was a disaster, hit every newspaper in the country, and some people say Ashtabula would have been a town the size of Cleveland had this not happened, because they have a fine harbor. It just created a stigma that it never grew out of. Next. Okay. What happens to all that infrastructure? 300-room hotels, taverns, bars, gazebos, building parks. It all ended up next like this. They just couldn't make money. Next. This is the Tally-Ho coach. People would, it took all day to get there from Cleveland. You come in by train to Mentor, and you ride this coach up the hill. It ended life as a chicken coop once they took the wheels off of it. Next. Is there any remaining evidence? Next. You've all seen this. This is in Devil's Kitchen. This is graffiti dating back to the 1860s. Next. I often find bits and pieces of the hotel. I always sit it next to a tree to talk about it to the next group. Every time I come back, it's gone. I don't know why people walk off with stuff like that. This is the pump house, the only structure that's still alive down in a ravine. And here's some electrical insulators that brought electricity to those hotels. Next. This was found by Tony Barabani and his late wife one day on a hike up there. This is a bottle of Mexican Mustang liniment. I think it was produced for about 50 years in the United States, a very popular medicine for aching pains. The active ingredients is 1/3 olive oil, 1/3 crude petroleum, the stuff that comes out of the ground, and one-third ammonium carbonate, which is a smelling salt, okay? It was a cure for lameness, sore throats, burns, sprains, insect and snake bites, common colds, and 30 other ailments in adults, children, and domestic animals. And I love this old advertising card here. It's how they used to advertise the old days. Mustang liniment for man and beast. Use Mustang liniment and you will be all right in a day or two, and so will your horse. Okay. Next. Okay. What spell the end of the resort? Okay. Next. Henry Ford in the automobile. He looks like a dapper rich guy here. Henry Ford could take off that coat and roll off his sleeves and go to a barn and get some baling wire and some scrap and fix anything on that car. He knew everything about every vehicle he ever manufactured. But why go to Little Mountain all day when you could spend all day going to Niagara Falls? So that was another pressure. Next. Let's talk about the eastern white pines up there. Why was that a strategic war material by the British Crown? Next. These magnificent trees can bend over double in a storm. As the engineers call it, bending moment without breaking. Priceless if you've got a huge fleet of sailing, three-masted sailing ships like the British had. So the British king said, I own every white pine in the United States. No one is allowed to cut one down unless it's for use as a strategic war material. Infuriating the colonists who went out and deliberately cut down every one they could find. And these were magnificent trees. They had trunks like that. And it's so sad because there are only a few left in the Great Smoky Mountains. Next. Next one. Okay. Here's the beautiful bark. White, we tell all the kids, white pine, WHITE, five needles on it. Next. And everyone thinks that this flag up here, or the snake, or don't tread on me, was the original American flag indicating we wanted independence. It was not. It was the white pine. The first ships that engaged the British were showing the white pine. And that was so important in the American economy. It was up there with beaver pelts, gold, silver, cotton, all the exports that were going back to Europe. The Brits used to load huge barges and pull them across the Atlantic to stock for their ship, for their navy. Next. So last question, finally. How did the forest survive in the face of so many threats? Next. Drought, fire, windstorm, blizzards. Nature is not kind up there. Human tree clearing, construction, unrestrained hunting and trapping, botanical collecting and harvesting. Next. Introduce pathogens and insects. Just go down the line. Beech bark, beech leaf, chestnut bite, dust elm, emerald ash borer, woolly adelgid, and then industrial pollution from Cleveland, Detroit, Gary, Chicago, acid rain, sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxide. How did it survive in the face of all that? Next. Climate change, suburban sprawl, forest fragmentation, edge effects, introduction of non-native invasive species, noise pollution, light pollution, and browse damage to deer browse. My last slide. And I take a quote from David Kirk from the screenplay from The Lost World, Jurassic Park. It says, if we could only step aside and trust in nature, life will find a way, and these creatures require our absence to survive, not our help. Well, that's not really true. The Arboretum does a great deal of work up there trying to maintain and sustain that forest. So that's it. That's your tour of Little Mountain, and I'm happy to entertain any questions.
That geologic anomaly of the Sharon conglomerate, is that the same as an anticline?
It looks like one. It's the same shape, but anticlines normally form at depth in semi-plastic rock by slow stresses caused by
Uplifting?
uplifting, downlifting, plate collisions. This was caused in one day by a storm. So it takes millions and millions of years for an anticline in rock to perform. But that's a good question because it's the same shape. In fact, the professor called it this anticlinal shape.
I know where anticlines are.
Oh, yeah.
And Lake County, yeah.
Oh, yes.
What was it, sharing conglomerate laid down?
Around 315 million years ago, don't quote me when we have
And there are a lot of other areas that have this shared.
loads of them, yes. They're big quarries, and Ecophilia now bought out Best Sand. And is there any relation? Yeah.
Am I any relation?
Yeah.
Everybody says, well, you wish you were.
So, but a lot of places you can find it. Thompson. So, but this is the northern extent of it up here. Okay. I saw another hand. Yes, sir.
Are all those plants and things on, do they actually come with the glaciers that are on top of Little Mountain?
No, they've come since. They've moved in since.
They've
Yeah.
blown in, so it's more.
Yeah,
of a
right.
plant zone.
Yeah. The glaciers destroyed everything. And that's one reason why Europe, I lived there for many years, stationed overseas. Europe has a much less biodiverse nature than we do. The glaciers moved south and north from the Alps, which run east and west. They trapped everything in between, wiped it out. In the United States, our mountain ranges run north and south, the Appalachians, the Rockies. So as the glaciers moved south, the plants were able to advance in front of them. When they melted back, they were able to come back. So, exactly, yeah, precisely.
How did John Muir's realization of glacial geology, did that have any effect on the understanding or interpretation of geology in Ohio?
Steve, I love that story. It was a big argument between him and the state geologist of California over Yosemite National Park. And what the state geologist said, this is obvious, faults on either side, the floor has dropped. And we have what's called a graben. It's a German word for ditch. And that's what formed it. And John Muir, I don't know if he was ever there. John Muir spent a great deal of time there, and he says, that's not what caused it. It was alpine glaciation. The glaciers hollowed this place out. And guess which one was right? so,
And that's what I was curious of.
Which one was it?
John Muir was right. And they didn't believe him because he wasn't a geologist. He was just some Scotsman that just loved nature.
And I just wondered if his insight about that and him kind of introducing that revolutionary notion of the impact of glaciers on geology, if that added any depth and understanding to interpreting the features in Ohio with the incredible glaciation that occurred here.
Yeah, I think that the scientist most responsible for that was, the last name is Cece, who lived in Europe, and he learned, he spent a lot of time in the Alps, and he saw all the evidences of alpine glaciations were very obvious, because you see them right next to the glacier left behind. When he started traveling in other places that didn't have mountains, he saw the same features. So that's how we came to the realization that glaciers once covered huge areas of the earth. The other misconception you'll see many times, they're spreading from the North Pole. That's nonsense. Glaciers cannot survive over water. They immediately calve. Glaciers, the point where they start is always on land, up in northern Canada. Yes, ma'am.
Excuse me, you showed the glaciers overtopping Little Mountain, and I've heard
Yes.
for Ritchie Ledges they think they split. How do we see differences between those with respect to the glaciers?
Given how high they were, even had they split, I believe you still would have had a mile of ice on top. I would be surprised if any place in Ohio was not covered by glaciers that got glaciated completely. Now there is an area in Wisconsin where somehow these huge glaciers didn't cover. It's a big area. And no one knows how that happened.
That's true in Alaska too, right?
That's,
Is that true in Alaska as well? Was it-
yes,
Yeah.
that's a good point. Alaska didn't get much glaciation because they were all spreading from northern Canada. They never made it there, other than the mountains, from the mountains. Yeah.
What about like the Bruce Peninsula up in,
See?
Bruce Peninsula, like you're in Georgian Bay, is supposedly it.
Has a lot of rare plants.
It was, yeah, not a lot of rare plants.
Not actually it's around.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that. Yeah,
It forms port of Lake Huron and Georgian Bay.
yeah, yeah.
And it has a lot of.
Unusual plants.
So usually a lot of rare plants result from people not messing with the place, unfortunately.
Very simple.
Yeah, yeah. Yes, ma'am.
I have a quick question about sand.
I'm sorry?
Sand. Supposedly, the sand in Chardon, Ohio, which gets mined and used for golf courses all over the country,
Yeah.
is supposed to be a very fine quality.
Yeah.
Would that be something that would have been behind these ridges as they were developed?
That's ground up.
Yeah, that's ground
That
sand.
is ground up
That-
about the conglomerate.
Yeah, that is Sharon conglomerate. Sharon conglomerate is 98% pure silicon dioxide quartz, both the cement and the pebbles.
So they take it and they.
They're sending that those quarries are shipping sand to Saudi Arabia because it's so pure that you can use it for foundry blocks, you can use it for specialized glass, and they don't have that clean of sand in Saudi Arabia. Yeah.
Now, there are, so that sand is, the sand itself is not being mined, the stone is being mined and ground up. But there are sand lenses on the upswing of the coming up with the rise of the Sharon conglomerate. For example, at Penitentiary Glen, down off the peak of the hill, there is a sand lens there that is masonry grade sand. And, you know, it goes for hundreds and hundreds of feet. And it's-
Interesting.
Oh yeah, it's a fascinating thing. But it's not a lake deposition. I think my speculation is it was a deposition of the glaciers as they were receding that was ground off for some reason, the way that, you know, material is striated as it dropped down.
Yeah.
But we hit it when we were going to put in our wastewater treatment facility because we hit this lens and we couldn't build an evapotranspiration pond. We built the first wetland in Ohio associated with sanitary treatment.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Because it was much easier to build a small thing and depend on the plants to promote the evapotranspiration. To build the kind of lake or the pond that we needed and the line in, because of the greatness and permeability, it cost us hundreds and hundreds of thousands.
Many of the nurseries we see in Lake County, and there's a lot of them, they're basically in sand. They're in ancient sand flats from the retreat of Lake Erie. The other thing you need to know, Lake Erie is half the size it used to be, but it didn't just gradually dry up. It dropped in stages, and then for a few centuries, beaches occurred. Then it dropped again, and another beach. Then it dropped again. And that was caused by ice dams releasing. And there are huge areas in Canada where that water escaped. There are potholes that are 10 feet deep. This happened in a catastrophic flood. It's kind of interesting. And then and other glacial lakes followed a similar history. Well, thank you all. Any
Well, this
others?
is an excellent talk.
Okay,
Pat.
thank you all for your...
Maybe we should also take a field trip with you up on Little Mountain.
What's that?
Maybe we should take a field trip with you on Little Mountain.
Where's the name?